sit here and stall for a moment while I make sure that people start getting the notification, and I see people hopefully showing up because I will be able to watch the count of people present. So I'm just going to kind of stall for a moment and talk about the fact, okay, we now have our first person here other than me, so yay, and people are now arriving. So awesome, welcome everyone as you're arriving. And what I'm probably gonna do is like maybe start the stream like a minute early and then have like a little countdown timer to make sure that this all works. That's kind of my plan here. But I see Jeff, I see Joanne, great. Glad that you're all making it here. And I'm still gonna, okay, more people, Dennis, excellent. So people arriving, and this is fantastic. So this is, again, what I'm looking at going to be using going forward. So I'll definitely be taking feedback on how well it's working. But one way or another, I'm going to make it work. So I'll take feedback on what can be done to make things work better. So my first order of business here is make sure if I play some music that it works for you to hear the music. So let's hear our opening theme. So hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and this is the Music Masterclass, the new and improved version of, hopefully improved. It'll be improved over time. It's a framework for making improvements is maybe a better way of looking at it. So this is where we're going to be, and I'm going to tell you as we do things, some of the neat features that will be possible here, but mostly it just really hopefully fosters more of a sense of community to actually keep this in the community. And but there's other things about it that I'm going to enjoy. So what I'm going to do here is see if in the iPhone app I can join the stream, because supposedly that's possible. If I join the stream from my iPhone app, I want to see what anyone would see if they were doing this. And I'm not, oh, there's a notification, but I don't see the notification about the stream. So that's interesting. I expected to see that and I don't, but that's okay. So we got some people here and I got my chat window here. Sounds great. Excellent. The chat's, hopefully the chat's working. You have to open the chat. So if you haven't already done so, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, you see a little chat balloon, and you might have to, depending on how big your screen is, I think it tries to size your screen to decide if it should open the chat by default. But yes, the chat works. One thing to know, on some systems, you might have to manually scroll the chat. Like once there's too much to fit on the screen, on some browsers, it seems like it just scrolls automatically to show you new comments as they show up. On other browsers, it feels like it doesn't do that. And I'm not sure why, but that's the story. So glad that the sound was working okay. I put a lot of effort into, just crazy amounts of effort into doing that. So by the way, I am using, I posted, did I post? No, I didn't post in there. I have to show you this. This is like Geek City here, but just because that's part of what I do, I developed my very first Chrome extension, and it's this guy here called Original Sound. And so this allows me to have the effect of what in Zoom is called the original sound option that turns off all the fancy echo cancellation and noise suppression and auto gain control, turns off all that stuff. So I basically wrote a Chrome extension that allows me to turn off those same processing, and that's what allows this to work. So anyhow, because without it, the music would have been very disappointing. My piano playing would be disappointing also. Could be anyhow. All right, so great. Glad that people are here. Things are working. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start talking here, doing my usual thing. And as things come up, I will also be able to, tell you about some of the new things that could happen. So the first thing that I want to do is follow up on what I said in the newsletter and what there was some discussion in the community about scales. So I'm going to flip over to that discussion here in the community about the scales. And I see there's a more recent comment that I haven't even seen yet. I'm going to have it stay in Chrome. So I talked about the fact that, you know, there's lots of scales that you could possibly want to learn, but I am trying to be, I don't know, not diplomatic. That's not the word I'm looking for. Circumspect, is that a word? Yeah. I don't want to have to like think I have to learn every possible scale to make music. In other words, I want to be able to improve my palette of sounds that I can make, but I don't need every tube of paint in the art store. I've got a set of watercolors, new watercolor pencils that I'm expecting to be getting today. Very excited about, and it's a set of 20 pencils, and that's more than enough for me. I typically only use like 5 or 6 colors at most. And then you can mix from there, and it's the same way with colors for scales. So the original modes are the ones that we get starting with C. And I'm actually going to come back and just look at the chat and make sure that I'm not missing anything else. By the way, piano okay? It's probably a little loud on the piano. Ideally, I'd be able to get the microphone closer and turn the volume down on it, but hopefully it's not breaking up too bad. We did a little test run on Zoom for office hours of the same basic setup. So Ionian mode, Dorian mode, Phrygian mode, Lydian mode, Mixolydian mode, Aeolian mode, Locrian mode. Those, and then Ionian mode again. Those are the historic modes. And yes, they had all sorts of different variations on those modes depending on what the top note was, whether the final note was the same as the top and bottom note, or whether the final note was like from here to here, but with a final note of that is different than this to this with a final note of this. They had all sorts of different names for these things. Not all that important to me to be able to sort all of that business out, but those 7 modes are definitely there, and by around 1700, those were the ones that were recognized. The ones that I then talked about last week were the modes of melodic minor. So it's the same thing, but with this flatted third here, E flat. So melodic minor. This one is typically called Phrygian sharp 6. And yes, thank you for the birthday wishes. And that's why I've got my watercolors coming too. And also this new computer, some of you heard me mention that at the cafe yesterday. I decided to treat myself to a new, faster computer, one of the faster computers that you can get that's fanless, which is important to me. And so that's also going to hopefully be improving things here. So this is scale here. Is sometimes called Phrygian sharp 6 because it starts off like Phrygian with that real characteristic half step, but a Phrygian scale would have that note in it. This note has a raised 6 compared to the regular Phrygian. So Phrygian sharp 6 is a typical name for that. Screen size changes when changing to full screen. Yeah, I've noticed that too, to be honest, and I'm not sure why that happens. Not sure about that, but yeah, it does seem to be a thing. If you hit the full screen option, it seems like it I don't know if it's trading off between thinking it wants to show my screen share versus showing my face. I really don't know what it's doing. But anyhow, the next one is called Lydian augmented because like Lydian, it has a raised 4th, but it also has a raised 5th compared to major. So compared to major, it has a raised 4th and a raised 5th. Lydian augmented. And that's the name, George Russell, when I mentioned George Russell as being kind of the father of a lot of this kind of thinking of using the modes of melodic minor as colors for creating melodies, that was the scale that he chose as the parent scale. He doesn't think of these as modes of melodic minor. He calls them modes of Lydian augmented. Lydian augmented is his main scale for various theoretical reasons that he goes into more. And by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that George Russell is 50% African American. This is Black History Month in the United States, and often for something like this, I might have chosen to focus specifically on jazz or something, some form of music with significant Black contributions. There's not major Black contributions to music in the Renaissance, really, because that just wasn't really a thing, at least not to Renaissance music, not to European music, but George Russell is a huge, huge contributor to this. So anyhow, hats off to George Russell. All right, so that's the Lydian augmented scale. This scale is the Lydian dominant scale. It has that raised fourth and then flatted seventh. This scale here doesn't really have a good name. It just doesn't. It's the fifth mode of the melodic minor. That's frankly all I know of it as. It's got within it a major third, a perfect fifth, a flat 13th, which is a nice note, and a flatted seventh. So it fits a G7 chord with a flat 13, but it doesn't have A flat, and I'm going to come back to that. A flat is a really nice note also. So that scale is fifth mode. Mixolydian flat 6 if you need to have a name. It's Mixolydian is that. Mixolydian flat 6, right? This scale then, starting on A, we usually call Locrian sharp 2. Locrian would have had a B flat and otherwise been the same. So this is Locrian sharp 2. The second scale degree is raised compared to Locrian. And then after that, it's Locrian. And then we have this scale, which has a number of different names, but is really the fancy, cool scale that I talked a bit about last week that I often refer to as the altered scale. It's also often called the diminished whole tone scale because it starts off like a diminished scale, which we'll talk about more briefly. Half step, whole step, half step, whole step. So alternating half steps and whole steps, right? Half, whole, just like diminished scales start. But from there, it's whole, whole, whole. So it ends like a whole tone scale. Starts like a diminished scale, ends like a whole tone scale. So that scale is often called the diminished whole tone scale or the altered scale because if you look at what's in it, it's got that note there, which I'll call D sharp for now, and A. So it has within it basically a B7 chord, but it doesn't have the F sharp. It doesn't have the actual fifth of the B7 chord. It has a B7 chord with a flat 5 or with a sharp 5 or both. But it also has the flat 9. So it has the flat 9 in it. And it also has the sharp 9 in it. It has all the alterations in it. Compared to B7, B7 would have an F sharp, but it has the flat 5 and sharp 5 instead of the fifth, and it has a flat 9 and a sharp 9. It's an amazingly complex scale, and you really have to cheat to see that, because if I really spell this thing literally, this is B, C, D. This is E flat. Right? F, G, A, B. E flat is not the third of a B7 chord. D sharp is. So this scale really only makes sense in a world in which we think of D sharp and E flat as the same note. And most of us probably do. But historically, it's not necessarily. Historically, D sharp and E flat are two different notes, possibly tuned differently. So in order to make use of that altered scale, you really have to embrace the idea of equal temperament, the idea that you really can treat D sharp and E flat as the same pitch. Okay, so those are, if I think of those 7 modes of the major scale, those 7 modes of melodic minor, that adds up to 14 scales. And then I said, okay, well now what? And I said those are the only scales that you can get if we put this certain set of restrictions on our number of scales. We say that we have to just be whole steps and half steps. I didn't want to have a scale that just has a big leap in it and then tiny little half steps after. I didn't want big gaps in my scale. Why not? Because, okay, so if you play a melody and say, hey, this comes from this scale that has this big gap in it, I would say, hey, you know what? It also comes from this other scale that doesn't have a big gap in it. In other words, people talk about the pentatonic scale. This is a scale, right? The pentatonic scale. There's different pentatonic scales, but this is the typical one we learn. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Well, any melody that you create using those notes, you might tell me, hey, that came from the pentatonic scale, but I could tell you, yeah, but it also came from the major scale. You just happen to not play an F or a B. It's not new colors on your palette. It's actually just taking some of the color off your palette. It's taking the color of the F and the B off your palette. And that's nice. Limited palettes are a nice thing. But my point is, oh yeah, Dean, it's your birthday too. I totally forgot. And Dean, I'm glad you're here because I want to bring you up in a little bit. If you're okay with that, I will invite you up when the moment comes. I lost my train of thought. Lost my train of thought completely. Wow, that's crazy. If I say that a melody comes from the pentatonic scale, or if you tell me that, I can tell you it really came from the major scale and you just left a couple notes out. So that's why I don't typically worry about those guys. I'm not saying they're not interesting scales, but if you're looking to add color to your harmonic palette, and then stop, and work on other things, I'm telling you, there is a good stopping point. It's after you've learned all 14 of those modes and then 2 other scales. 2 other scales. Oh my gosh, Dean, your birthday's tomorrow. Okay, well, so you're the 25th. So that's George Harrison's birthday as opposed to Michel Legrand's birthday. And again, I lose my train of thought so easily. So I said that those 14 scales are a great starting point, but then there's a couple more worth knowing. So if we want to say it's nothing but whole steps and half steps, no gaps, then there's a couple other scales that become interesting. And one is the whole tone scale. And that is this one here, all whole steps. And because it's got all whole steps, no half steps in it, you get to the top note before you've hit all pitch names. So C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp. Oh my gosh, we didn't get any Bs, and suddenly we're at C. Or you could call this B sharp, I guess. And Sora, if you're here, that actually relates to the whole idea of historically Middle Eastern scales really needing different pitches on the second octave. I don't remember if that was a thing in the research. Oh, sorry, you're not even here. I know that, but that is a thing in a lot of Middle Eastern music, that the scales might have different pitches in that second octave. So one way or another, you got to skip a letter name to get that whole tone scale. And so let's see. Dean, I'm just going to go for it here. Dean, if you're up for it, I'm going to invite you up. So there you are. So I'm going to bring you up, and I want to hear you say, we're going to talk a minute about your whole tone piece. And so meanwhile, I'm going to load it up while you come on board. So what we're about to see here is one of the cool new things that that we can do, that we couldn't do easily before. So Dean is joining me, and Dean, are you mic'd?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Now, the thing is, I hear you through my speaker, which I didn't want to hear, so I'm guessing that there might be some echo. So I'm actually going to put you in my headphone. Say something again.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Question for everyone else. Can you still hear him? Can you still hear Dean? So hopefully, I think there was, oh, sound's gone now? So talk again, Dean.
Yeah, it was gone briefly, but I'm sure it's back now. At least I can hear you fine.
Okay, but can people hear Dean? Did people hear Dean just speak just then? I don't know how much of a delay we have going here in the chat, but yep, okay,
Yeah,
you can hear.
it says they can hear us, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so Dean, you are using the whole tone scale, and so I call it the whole tone scale, and it has that property. It's all whole steps, and the term that I learned for that is a symmetric scale, in that it's the same pattern over and over again. It's a whole tone repeated. The other symmetric scale is the diminished scale, and I'll come to that later,
Mark,
which is whole half. Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
On your screen, I see a reduced version of the screen. I don't see the score if you're looking at the.
True. I don't have it up at the moment, but here it is.
Oh, okay. All right. There we go.
I wanted to be able to look at the chat, so that's pretty much why I was doing that. And that I really wanted to be able to see the chat here in the app, and supposedly that's possible, but I'm not actually seeing how. When I say the app, there is an iPhone app for Circle, and I haven't recommended people use it because I'm not convinced it's an improvement over anything. But in any case, all right. So this is the piece here that Dean composed using that, and I refer to it as a symmetric scale and learned it under that term. But so tell us about your introduction to this scale and your composition here, Dean.
Okay, so I have a confession. I didn't realize it was the whole tone scale when I was doing this. I was looking at the scales of Olivier Messiaen, and he has like 7 scales that he works with. I think that he created 6 of them. I really don't know, but you know, his very, very atonal type of composition has some appeal to me, not a huge amount of appeal, but I fell in love with his Tarangulila Symphony many years ago. And in fact, my notes regarding this little composition indicated, if you haven't heard that symphony, you really need to. It's really quite a remarkable work. Anyway, so I thought I would just take this scale and experiment with it and utilize some of the counterpoint things that you've covered in your counterpoint course, and just kind of go with it and see where it took me, and it ended up kind of fun, I think. There's
Great.
some sonorous things that are especially like the end is sort of a hypnotic end. I wish I would have gone on maybe another 20 seconds with it and hypnotize everybody. I used to actually be a hypnotherapist. So.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Anyway, so I guess that's probably about all I have to say on that at this point.
Nice, and I do want to say that I listened very briefly because I wasn't familiar with that symphony. I know a little other of his music, but I wasn't familiar with that. I listened to like a brief excerpt of it, but at a time when I didn't have the time to sit and listen to the whole thing. So I haven't listened to the whole thing yet. But yeah, we're going to hear your piece here and talk about it a little further in terms of this. Oh, so this scale, when Mastering, and I don't speak French, and so you all know that I just butcher French names. Messiaen, I guess is. Do you think that's correct, Dean? The way you said that?
That's probably as close as I could get. I don't know French either.
All right. So he calls these scales of limited transposition, right, is the term he uses. And that really means the same basic thing that I mean when I talk about symmetric scales, in that if you think about the major scale, that pattern of whole steps and half steps is irregular enough that everywhere there's basically 12 different major scales. If you start on C versus you start on D flat versus D versus E flat versus E, you get different collections of notes. However, these symmetric scales, the ones that have a repeating pattern to them, have the quality that there's not 12 of them. There's only 2 whole tone scales. There's this one with C, D, E, and those 3 black keys. And then there's this one with those 2 black keys and the rest of the white keys. And that's it. Every other scale, if you start on D, you're going to have the same scale that you had starting on C. It's the same set of notes. So there's really only two different whole tone scales, and that's what he means when he calls these scales of limited transposition. So before we play this, I believe I recall that you only use the one transposition. Is that right, Dean?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. So
his other scales have anywhere between 3 and 5, I think, transpositions, but I just stuck in the home key, so to speak.
Gotcha. And my guess is that 5 is probably not a thing. I'm going to guess that only factors of 12 are possible. I don't know that for a fact, but my math major in me tells me you could have a scale that's got 2, 3, 4, or 6, but probably you can't have a scale with 5 transpositions, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, so let's hear the music here. All right, really nice, and I totally get what you mean. That figure that you get into at the end here, I feel like, oh yeah, 20 more seconds of exploring that texture would have been probably most welcome. So yeah, there's a number of things that I would love to say about this, but anything else, Dean, that you want to say or ask before I jump into some other things?
Oh yes, I didn't mention the rhythmic treatments. There are some areas where, where is beat 1?
Yeah,
a lot of things are just shifted a little bit. And for instance, in measure, you've got there measure 24. Well, no, actually, it's back a little further. I think probably around 12 or so, where there are. Yeah, right there at the top of the page, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Where I have the triplets and the 16th notes and the 8th notes and things. And there's some other areas where, the rhythm is just kind of like you're in outer space. You don't know where you are rhythmically.
Yes, and the fact that you've got a retard going on there also contributes to that too, I think. Yeah.
It does. And then, of course, the texture changes down to 2 voices and then adding in a voice and adding in a voice in order to give some variety of texture also.
Yeah, and so to me, this was like an interesting follow-up to the, now I'm forgetting, was it no, it was like a Social Security number or whatever, some sort of ID number based piece, right? Of exploring different textures with 4 numbers.
Right. Yeah.
And so this has a similar character in which, that piece that involved just 4 different pitches explored, there was a ton of variety in the textures that happened and the rhythms and so forth, even though melodically it's the same 4 notes over and over again. Well, this has a similar idea in that it's the same 7 pitch or same 6 pitches over and over again, all within one scale, and they're not trying to imply different chords. It's possible to imply different chords, and you do to some extent, but you come back to C so often that it might as well all be C. In fact, just for grins, I'm going to make one little adjustment here. I'm just going to raise those 2 C's to D.
Okay.
And now it's still in the same scale, but it creates, because this sound is basically, if we hear C in the bass, we're going to perceive that as some sort of C7 chord. As soon as I put a D in the bass, we're going to hear that same cluster, but we might perceive it as a change of chord. And so that's possible to do even without changing scales. I want to see what it sounds like. So that's a type of motion you can get because in that scale, all notes are created equal, right?
Yes.
All notes are created equal. For that matter, I could go to B flat and make that be a pedal. And that's, you know, you have different bass notes throughout, but it's that repetition of, it's the repetition of the C here that establishes it as feeling like a tonic. So now I'm going to hear it as a C chord going to a B flat chord. It's like magic the way this works. Whatever note you put on the bottom of this whole tone cluster becomes the root of that chord in the mind's ear. So yeah, what you end up with is, other than that, other than the bass helping differentiate things, these pitches are indistinguishable from each other. And so it allows you to do things like in that passage you talked about. Really, I'm going to start even a measure earlier, couple measures. Yeah, this is really where you've got the cross. That's where you've got the cross thing.
8,
yeah. So because there's not a clear sense of which note is the tonic, there's also the potential to say there's not a clear sense of which beat is beat 1. Because normally, leading tone to tonic kinds of phrases, we would hear that going into beat 1 of a measure. But if we don't have a leading tone going into a tonic, the melody itself isn't likely to tell us where beat 1 is, and therefore you can probably afford to blur it, and that's exactly what you've done here. So I'm actually going to back up one more measure. So we hear beat 1, and then we maybe hear beat 1 get lost.
Mark,
yeah.
Can you turn up the sound a little bit?
Yes. Because this is quiet here. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Got it.
Thank you.
So between the tempo change that's happening here, but also the change in texture from 8th notes to quarter note triplets to 16th, and some of these triplets are like crossing the middle of the bar line. You don't have any that actually cross the bar line, because that's like hard to do in MuseScore, but you can pull it off. Like here, you could have gone boo da da. You could have had a voice come in a half a beat later and then cross that to blur things even more, had that been your goal.
Yeah,
but
I'd actually tried that, but MuseScore said can't do a triplet over the bar line. So I thought, oh, okay, well I won't.
Yeah. So, but for the record, since it's come up here, there's a couple ways. Yeah, you can't literally do this. You can't try to create a quarter note triplet. If I type 6, Control 3, what? That's interesting. I said 6, Control 3. Boy, that's odd. I'm not sure why it's doing. I guess it's just decided, oh, you can't have a quarter note triplet, so I'm not even going to let you try. But yeah, you can't have a quarter note triplet cross that bar line. But what you can do is this. You can do a regular 8th note triplet, but make this be a quarter note, make that be an 8th note tied across the bar line, and actually start a new triplet here.
Yes. That would do it.
And make that be a quarter note, and make this be a D, and then tie it across. And then you can also play games with the notation of it, maybe hide these notes and add a quarter note in another voice, or, use a symbol of a quarter note to get that effect. But here, just so we can hear what this sounds like, see. Here we go. So yeah, you can have those kinds of effects if you work at it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but so yeah, the idea that the scale is very ambiguous. Not any of the notes could possibly be the root, depending on what you put on the bottom. It allows it to be a very ambiguous sound. It has what is sometimes referred to as a floating quality as a result. And so typically people don't want to float for that long. And so you use this scale for just a measure or two or four. And Debussy also used this scale quite a bit. And so building an entire composition out of it, and I believe in the chat, and I need to return to the chat to see, so one of the scores to The Good Woman of Sichuan used the whole tone extensively. That's good to know. So there might be other pieces out there that people could compare to that use the whole tone scale exclusively. But I'm going to put it into my context now of how I might use it as a jazz person, and I'll keep you on for just another minute, Dean, if you don't mind. I want to go back to my 2-5-1 chord progression. And if I'm going to have D minor 7 to G7 to C, that whole tone scale has a dominant 7th chord built within it, right? It's got the root, 3rd, and 7th anyhow. So when I come to my G7 is when I might use that scale. So I'm going to use them just to play. I'm just going to stick with the notes of C major for the 2 chord and the 1 chord. But when I get to the 5 chord, I'm going to use that whole tone scale. Again. So that is a commonly used sound in the jazz world, to just borrow that whole tone scale sound just over that 5 chord. And it's a nice use of it, but then it needs to resolve. And so what's going on here is we're not trying to resolve anywhere. And that's an interesting quality of it, that it's a dominant 7th chord that doesn't need to resolve if you repeat it often enough. Once you've repeated it often enough, then it doesn't need to resolve. It just establishes itself as a tonic. Did you start to feel C as a tonic of this?
Yes. Yeah.
Because you don't necessarily end that way.
No.
And did you deliberately think, oh, I've been hanging on C everywhere else, but I'm not going to hang on C for the last chord?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking. I think I was thinking of it as a flatted 5th dominant type of chord. Well, it's a tritone tritone relationship. So I was thinking of C going up to that's an A sharp. Is that an A sharp?
Yeah, you have an A sharp on that. So yeah, it's just a different chord. And elsewhere you use G sharp as the alternating bass note here, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that's what I was thinking right now. But yeah, I forgot how I ended. I haven't looked at it for a few days. So
yeah, that's fine. So the other thing that I wanted to point out about this, and see also you must have been conscious of this. One thing that all of these symmetric scales do is they encourage you to think in terms of sequences. Because if you take like the major scale and go and have that as a phrase, then go down a step, and then down another step, and then you can do sequences like that. A phrase that then just transposes itself up and down by step, but they'll all have different shapes, right? When I started at C, it was a whole step up and a half step down. When I started on B, it was a half step up and a whole step down. When I started on an A, it was a whole step up and a whole step down, right? So depending on what note you start with, you get different arrangements. Well, with these symmetric scales, you get patterns, you get sequences like that are all the same because they're all whole step, right? And then you have that answered in the next, in the other instrument. Whoops. Then you change the pattern there, which is fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, you use that sequence a lot. Were you like aware of this is an opportunity to do some extra heavy duty sequence stuff?
Well, I was thinking more in terms of imitative counterpoint.
Yeah. Gotcha. And sequences are a form of imitative counterpoint, but yeah, then they have that special quality when you're in one of these modes of limited transposition that causes them to be literal transpositions of each other rather than what we call tonal transposition. This is what we would call a tonal sequence, not as opposed to atonal, but just meaning it's been adjusted. The whole steps and half steps have been adjusted to stay within the key. So, anyhow, I really enjoy the things that you've done with this. And one other thing about the whole tone scale in particular, it's got major thirds in it. So it really lends itself to parallel thirds or parallel sixths as the converse of that. And you are exploiting that somewhere in there, right? Right here.
Well, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And the top of the next page where you just were also.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, right here. Yep.
Yeah.
So one of the things is, although there's a certain dissonance inherent in the scale, I mean, after all, tritones everywhere. Every note has a tritone partner in that scale. Tritones, it's tritones all the way down. As opposed to turtles all the way down, if you know that reference. So it's tritones everywhere, and yet there's also thirds, major thirds everywhere. So you can harmonize things in major thirds and get interesting effects that way. So anyhow, yeah, I like the things that you've done with this and the things that you've explored. And yeah, thanks for sending this along.
Okay, thanks. See you later.
Cool. All right, see ya. I think I can then click a button and make Dean
make me go away.
Make you go away. Not that I don't want to, but I wanted to talk about something else also. And I don't know how to do. Oh, wait a minute. I click next to your name, remove as co-host. All right. Thanks, Dean.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so that there was again one of the things that we can do in the master class now of being able to bring people on. So one of the things also that I wanted to mention, Parsa, I'm glad that you're here mentioning this. Albenberg, 7 early songs. Are you saying that was the answer to my question about someone using a whole tone scale more exclusively? If so, great. I'm going to check that out, as well as the symphony, the Messiaen symphony. But Parsa, I'm glad you are here. I have your piece loaded up, and I want to just talk about this briefly, and if you are interested in talking some on camera, I'll be happy to bring you up in a moment. But I'm going to play a little of this piece, and in Parsa's description, he said that it was conventionally tonal or traditional tonality in ways that, to me, I was like, well, wait a minute, in what sense is this true? And the more I listen to it, the more I can kind of see some things. And I saw the comments that were posted earlier today, but I was teaching earlier, so I haven't really read them. So I'm going to play just the first few measures, and then if you want to come on board and talk, or just talk in the chat, either one is fine. But I just want to play the first couple measures, and then we'll have a frame of reference to talk a little more. All right, and I'm going to pause there so I can return and see if Parsa's into coming up. All right, then in that case, you will shortly, as soon as I Parsa. Oh, wait a minute, I lost you. I clicked the wrong thing. Hold on, let me get it back. I find your name on the list, and then I say invite to co-host, and then you should see some form of notification pop up. And boy, you saw it, so good. I'm glad it works. Parsa. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, I hear you. I see you. Excellent. It works. Cool. Oh. So beautiful piece. I really enjoy this. And to me, there's a lot of interesting textural things going on, just as there were in Dean's piece, although they're entirely different ones. What else do you want to tell us before I play through the rest of this?
Yeah, well, I have composed this for a new music festival that is being. Yes, it's going to be recorded end of the March. So some of the things I was, since I have two parts only, I was pushed to sort of work around the constraints, create interesting effects since I don't have harmony as in a keyboard harmony, with texture, means of driving the rhythm. My music very often thrives on rhythm so for example, a couple of effects that I tried to use was, dissonance of, two notes, for example, and the measure. Yeah, for example, you see that roll in the flute.
Yes.
The flute is able to bend the pitch by a half step down.
Yeah. And yeah.
It won't be able to bend it fully to that pitch, but sustaining it there, you have a microtonal effect, and it will, have moments of departure and intersection with the notes that are happening in the English horn harmonically. So we will get all those different overtone collisions between the two instruments. Yeah.
So I actually have a question about that specifically, and I don't think Dave is here, although maybe you are, and I missed it. I think maybe it said he wasn't going to be able to be. But I'm curious from Parsa, do you play the flute?
No, I don't play the flute, but I was able to work closely with the flute player, and I have one very close person to me who plays the flute.
Okay.
So.
My understanding, which could totally be off, is so for most wind instruments, your lip allows you to move the pitch lower, but not so much higher. Like on a reed instrument, you just loosen your embouchure and you can bend the pitch down. On the flute, my understanding is the rolling action of the flute changes it, but it pushes it up. Am I right about that?
So you are actually, that is true. You are more able to bend it down than you are up.
On flute too?
Yeah. On flutes, you are able to bend down close to a half step.
Okay, so that's what I wasn't sure about. For some reason, I thought maybe on flute the rolling thing would actually move the pitch up, but it moves it down also. Okay, that's good to know. Because I don't play the flute and don't remember these things. All right, so I'm going to start the measure right before that, and just keep listening here, and then keep talking a little bit. So the comment that I had made about it was, well, gee, it doesn't seem conventionally tonal to me, in that, like, there's very few measures in which I can look at them and say, oh, this is clearly, here's my tonal center. I do want to, before I leave the subject of these scales behind, point out that whole tone scale that we just heard, that was one of the missing scales that I said, one of the extra scales we want to learn. The other one is this one I've alluded to, the diminished scale, that's alternating half steps and whole steps. Half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole. My brain is telling me I might be seeing an example of that in here, but I haven't examined it. Do you, Parsa, did you consciously use that diminished scale anywhere?
Not consciously, but I had echoes of the music of Prokofiev in the early 20th century in my head. So, you can very much hear echoes of the Faun in the opening,
Okay. Yeah, totally.
Alternating on full steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what the heck? I'll just start from the beginning again. Here we go. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I really enjoy this piece. And there's, so many different things that one could talk about in this. One of the things, oh, by the way, from a technical perspective, I would say I was hearing things in my headphone that I think was the sound of your microphone attempting to pick up the sound of that playback. I don't know if everyone else could hear little bits of that or if it's only because of how I have it set up, but probably you should mute while I'm doing the playback so it doesn't. See, that's the echo cancellation. If it weren't for the echo cancellation, we would have heard everything. But that was the spots where the echo cancellation failed, is the times when we could hear little bits of the music in there. So I want to see if we got some new comments. Screen frozen? Huh. All right. Well, hopefully it's okay. I see some people saying that they had some freezing going on, but hopefully that was just a temporary thing and that we're fine. Someone might want to check in and let us know if we're okay. Trevor's at least commenting about things, so I'm going to assume that means that things are okay. So yes, there's all sorts of cool stuff that I'm noticing in here. And as far as like what we talked about with like Dean's piece, this idea of phrasing in a way that obscures where beat one is, that's all over the place in here. And also even just obscuring the beat a little bit. There's phrases like this, right? Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. We talked about hemiolas last week. That came up in Trevor's piece, and it came up in whatever the other piece was. I'm blanking on what it was. But the idea of a rhythm that's essentially 3 bass superimposed on 4. And that's kind of a repeating motif here. So it's like 1E, 2, and right? Is that, I don't know, anything you want to, that's a rhythm you keep coming back to pretty often. Anything you want to tell us about that rhythm or about it, Parsa?
Yeah, so that's basically where the name Choro comes from, so basically, I am not Brazilian and I don't know jack shit about Brazilian music. Yeah,
because I was going to say, I'm not Brazilian, but I do know a fair amount of Brazilian music because I've played a lot of it and I am familiar with Choro. But yeah, overall, this doesn't have the sort of rhythmic underpinning that I'd expect, but it does have 16th note pulse with syncopations. Yeah. So absolutely.
Yeah, but they basically, I thought that's something I could exploit and then, shift it along the meter, superimpose the 2 instruments, make that intersection and departure kind of effect that you'll hear in, say, Stravinsky and all the other, 20th century composers that thrive a lot on rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and actually that same spot this is like actually the most tonal spot too, or not the most tonal, but like starting right around here, you can look at this and say, hey, look, B major. Right?
Yeah.
B major with some, chromatic alterations and stuff every once in a while. Those F natural, that little chromatic line, the F natural over here. But it's essentially a B major tonality there, then going to, more of a B flat kind of a tonal area there. And yet not doing things like 5-to-1 chord progressions within it. So not having the tonic dominant push and pull there, but it's using sounds that are roughly triadic. Is that a good characterization?
Yes, that is a good approximation. There is tonal gravitation in areas of B flat and B. You hear then say, like in music of Berg, you will hear that there's not all that much like direct tonal implications all the way, but you'll hear he uses that altering the gravitation towards 2 notes half steps apart to create that ambiguity.
Yeah. Yes, and anytime you have either half steps or stacks of fourths are the ones that I talked about last time. Oh, it was Sam. That's who the piece was with the hemiola, because he also had those stacks of fourths. Fourths, to a lesser extent, tritones, because tritones are associated with dominant seventh chords. But fourths have this ambiguity, seconds have this ambiguity that you're definitely able to exploit. And where there was one spot where you just were hammering away on some tritones. Where was that?
Yes, on parallels, or was it in was it in parallels, or was it towards the?
Yeah, it's right here. Right here. I remember measure 70. I'm going to play this passage right here. So, right tritones, and then, right. And then it goes somewhere a little bit different. But yeah, so that's basically moving these tritones up. Chromatically, at least I think of them as going up. Yeah, that's creating a certain type of motion, a certain tension release dynamic that happens from doing that without having it to be about, oh, this is a 5-chord going to 1. Do you have a particular frame of reference to tell us about for that passage there?
Yeah, basically, I wanted to generate some sort of a climax, both in terms of busyness in rhythm, and also I wanted to grab, I wanted to end with a tonal cadence. So I thought use that pull that dominant chords can create. Dominants can point towards each other, and eventually they can hammer away the point at some point. So I use that along with adding accents and creating metric, all those rhythmic overlaps.
Yes, because he has that same 3, patterns of 3 sixteenths, and then not just that, but both instruments are doing it in different times.
Yeah, basically Lego blocks in each parts of 3 and 2. Yeah.
So so just really, really cool stuff. And I there's aspects of it that made me smile, thinking of it as deliberately humorous. Like here, you have this quieter passage here, and then that that little pop in that unison there was and then when it comes back as a pop is a fifth. It's that's like a sound coming from a different kind of world there. Did you have what was your thinking in there?
It was mostly thinking timbral variety. So a little bit high.
Well, you haven't used that, that's for sure.
Yeah. A little bit high, a little bit low, but I wasn't thinking of exactly doing those things. I tried different things, listened to them. I'm like, yes, I like this pairing.
Yeah, that kind of feels like it's something that comes from a march. It's like the stinger at the end of a march or something.
Yes,
that it feels like. So it's like borrowing a different sound.
Yeah, circus music, basically.
Yeah, circus music. Yeah, totally. It's got that aspect. And frankly, choro has some of that aspect going on, too. If people want to listen to some choro music, definitely recommended. Yeah. So anyhow, I think I am going to I thank you for coming on here, Parsa, and sharing some of your music here. It's really great to get to hear just totally different kinds of things coming from different people. Love what you're doing, and good luck on that performance.
Thank you.
When is that coming?
End of March. We've booked the studio for towards the end of the March for the recording, and then the editing and everything. So by the beginning of April, we should have a recording.
Cool. Well, I hope I get to hear it.
Yeah, I'll post it. Thank you.
Great. Sounds wonderful. All right. Thanks for coming. All right, everyone. So I hope you've enjoyed this session of the week 1 of the new version of the masterclass. So again, I'm going to tell you, as I've been telling you for the last week and a half, that I am doing a workshop next Thursday. It would start probably about 4 hours from now. No, 2 hours from now? I forget. A couple hours from now. 3:30 Eastern? Is that what I don't even remember. The problem is I don't have the full details yet. So stay tuned. I promise I will have you the details, and I'm going to be doing this workshop on chord progressions next week. And then next month, we'll just be talking about chord progressions. If you feel like it, I recommend my harmony and chord progressions course. I'm going to kind of be drawing from that material. So if you're an All Access member, go check out that material. If you're not, think about becoming one, or just sign up for that course, the harmony and chord progressions course. We're going to learn a lot about how chord progressions work. So I'm going to play some music and kind of sign off other than that. So thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for all the comments, and yeah, check out some music. It's kind of Brazilian semi-classical music of like the early 20th century is, I think, how I would characterize it. It's sort of thought of as Brazilian tango is what choro is. Thanks everyone. Thanks Dean. Thanks Parsa for coming on board, and I will be keeping you up to date on what's going on with this workshop. But meanwhile, come back and join us here next week, and we'll hear some more music. So thanks everyone, and see you next time.